The morning of February 11th, 2026, started like any other at Elephant Bedroom Camp. Guests sipped coffee under acacia shade. Staff moved between the tinted suites, sweeping the wooden walkways that wind through the bush. Then somebody noticed her. A baby elephant, no taller than a kitchen counter, was walking between the tents on her own. No herd, no mother, no matriarch hovering nearby with that quiet, watchful posture every safari guide learns to read. Just a 4-month-old calf, dusty and disoriented, sniffing at canvas walls in the middle of a luxury safari camp inside the Samburu National Reserve in northern Kenya. The staff froze. Then they panicked in the good way. The calf was small enough to be lion food before sundown. She was also clearly disoriented, weaving between buildings, drifting toward the scrub at the camp edge where the bush opens into territory no 4-month-old should ever cross alone. So they did the only thing they could think of in the moment. They tied her gently to a tree. It bought time. It kept her from wandering off into something worse. And it gave them the minutes they needed to make the call that would set the entire rescue in motion. The number they dialed belonged to Save the Elephants, the research and conservation group that has worked the Samburu landscape for decades. Within hours, a team was on the way, led by Professor George Wittemyer of Colorado State University. Whittemeyer is the chief scientist for Save the Elephants. He has spent close to 30 years following the same families through this exact stretch of reserve. He knows their names. He knows their cousins. He knows which matriarch leads which subgroup during the dry months, and which ones tend to split off when the herd is stressed. That kind of background matters here, because finding one calf's family in Samburu isn't like flipping through a photo album. At any given moment, somewhere around 40 distinct elephant families are using the reserve. 40 separate social units, shifting, splitting, recombining. Without a long memory of who belongs to whom, the calf would have been just another unidentified baby. When Whittemeyer's team reached her, she was in worse shape than the camp staff realized. Severely dehydrated, hot, exhausted from hours under the Kenyan sun. The first thing they did was simple. Bottle-fed her clean water. Slowly. Let her body remember what hydration felt like. Then they coated her in fresh mud, the way her own mother would have, cooling her skin and easing the heat stroke that was already creeping in. But that mud bath wasn't only about temperature. Before they could even think about getting her back to her family, the team had to deal with a problem most people never consider. The calf smelled like humans now. She had been handled, hosed down, leaned against. To a wild herd, that human scent can be enough to trigger rejection, even from blood relatives. So the researchers rubbed her down with elephant dung, real, fresh dung from wild animals in the area. It sounds rough. It worked. The mud and dung together masked enough of the foreign scent to give her a chance. Now came the hard part. Who did she belong to? This is where decades of grinding, unglamorous fieldwork paid off. Save the Elephants keeps meticulous long-term records on the Samburu population. Births, deaths, who calved when, who lost a baby, which females tend to travel together. The team didn't have to guess at the calf's lineage. They had a database and one figure was missing. Sylvia, the matriarch of one of the subunits. She wasn't with her family. She wasn't on the GPS map. And as the team pieced it together, a hard truth started to form. If Sylvia was missing and an orphaned 4-month-old had stumbled into a tourist camp roughly within Sylvia's normal range, the calf was almost certainly hers. Anyone who's worked the reserve for long knows Sylvia's name. Years earlier, she had survived a gunshot wound to her jaw, the kind of injury you almost never walk away from. It almost certainly came from a retaliatory shooting after a crop raid, the same brutal arithmetic that plays out across rural Africa whenever a hungry herd hits a farmer's field. Sylvia carried that scar for over a decade. She also had a known habit that the researchers had logged again and again. During stressful seasons, she would split from the main group and travel apart. That behavioral quirk suddenly explained everything. If Sylvia had wandered off with her young calf and something had gone wrong, no other adult would have been close enough to step in. They loaded the baby into a specialized research vehicle and drove her out to the Gurgir Plains, where the rest of Sylvia's extended family had been spotted. Then they opened the back. Nothing. The calf didn't bolt toward the herd. She didn't trumpet. She climbed down, confused, and started pacing around the truck, sniffing at bushes maybe 40 meters from her own relatives. For a long, ugly minute, it looked like the rescue might fail right there. Then an adult female peeled off from the group and walked toward the vehicle. Her name in the team's records was Adelaide, the calf's biological aunt. Adelaide came close, lifted her trunk, and let out a low, structural rumble. Not the high-pitched trumpet of alarm, a deep, chest-shaking sound that traveled through the air and through the ground at the same time. The baby froze, looked up, and screamed back. That single exchange lit the whole family on fire. Every adult in the group erupted at once. Rumbles, trumpets, the kind of noise that doesn't sound real until you're standing inside it. The entire herd charged the vehicle, not to attack, to surround her, to touch her, to press in close from every angle and breathe her in. Biologists have a name for what happened in those few minutes. They call it a greeting ceremony. It's a behavior elephants reserve almost exclusively for reunions after long separations. The family members reached out with their trunks and stroked the calf's mouth, her temporal glands, her genitals, exchanging scent and chemical information through the vomeronasal organ. During these moments, the temporal glands behind the eyes can visibly stream a fluid called temporine, a physical signature of emotional intensity you can see from meters away. To understand why that reunion mattered so much, you have to understand how elephants are built to find each other. They live in what scientists call a fission-fusion society. Big families fragment into tiny groups to forage, then recombine hours, days, even weeks later, often without ever losing track of one another. The connective tissue holding all that together is sound, specifically infrasound. Most elephant communication happens in frequencies below 20 hertz, well under what a human ear can pick up. Those rumbles don't just travel through air. They travel through the ground as seismic waves, moving through the Earth's crust and bypassing obstacles above the surface. On a cold, still desert night, an elephant can hear a relative's call from more than 10 kilometers away. They pick up those vibrations through their feet. Specialized mechanoreceptors, called Pacinian corpuscles, packed into the fatty pads of their soles, register the signal. From there it travels up the leg bones and into the middle ear by bone conduction. So when Adelaide rumbled and the baby screamed back, what looked like a simple call and response was actually one of the oldest and most precise communication systems on the continent, doing exactly what it evolved to do. Each elephant carries its own vocal signature. Members of a herd can tell apart the rumbles of more than 100 different individuals. Matriarchs use specific directional rumbles to mean let's go or this way, reaching consensus across the group without anyone laying eyes on each other. A herd is a network held together by sound and memory, and the memory part is no metaphor. The oldest female in an elephant family functions as a living archive. She remembers water holes from droughts that happened before some of her daughters were born. She remembers which humans tried to kill the herd and which left them alone. Elephants pass the mirror self-recognition test, putting them in a tiny club that includes apes, dolphins, and magpies. Their brains have a hugely developed temporal lobe, the area tied to memory and emotion. They show what researchers call targeted empathy, identifying specific distress in another individual and acting to fix it. When a herd member is upset, others come over, touch her mouth softly, and emit quiet chirps to calm her down. They visit the bones of their dead, running their trunks over skulls and tusks of relatives gone for years. They make tools, swatting flies with modified branches, plugging water holes with chewed bark to slow evaporation. That's the kind of mind that was now wrapping itself around one terrified baby on the Girgir Plains. A few days later, an aerial search team flew over the area looking for the missing matriarch. They found Sylvia. Her body, by then, had been there long enough for the researchers to piece together what had happened. The carcass analysis pointed to natural causes. She had died weeks before the calf ever walked into Elephant Bedroom Camp, which meant that small, dusty baby had been trying to survive on her own, without milk, without protection, for far longer than anyone had guessed. The reunion was real. The relief was real. The problem wasn't solved. A second aunt, Markle, stepped into the role no one had asked her to fill. She moved close to the calf and stayed there. Within days, she was nursing her. That alone is rare enough to stop researchers in their tracks. It's called allomothering, the practice of female relatives taking on full maternal duties for calves that aren't their own. But Markle's body was doing something even rarer. She was producing milk. The reason was quietly heartbreaking. Markle had lost her own calf earlier that year. Her body was still hormonally primed to nurse. The grief that had emptied her own life made it possible for her to save her niece. The team allowed themselves one afternoon of cautious optimism. The next morning, that optimism almost cracked apart. A researcher scanning the area found the calf lying motionless in a dry riverbed. The herd had moved up to higher ground without her. For a long, sick moment, everyone braced. Then she shifted. She had just slept too deeply. When she finally woke and called out, Adelaide came back for her immediately. But the pattern kept repeating. The calf would wander off. She would lag behind. She would drift away from the herd for reasons no one could pin down. Markle was nursing her, but a 4-month-old elephant needs an enormous volume of high-quality milk to grow properly. Markle was likely not producing enough to fully sustain her. The calf grew visibly thinner. She walked with the slow, dragging step of an animal running on empty. The herd moved fast. She couldn't keep up. And the Girgir Plains, where they were now traveling, are dense with lion prides. On the night of February 14th, 2026, tourists in the area spotted the calf again, alone, in the open, in prime lion hunting ground. Save the elephants, and Kenyan conservation authorities sat down and made a decision nobody wanted to make. Leaving her with the herd meant watching her die, either from malnutrition or predation, within days. So they intervened, permanently. The calf was moved into the care of the Reteti Elephant Sanctuary in northern Kenya. Reteti is something genuinely new in conservation. It's Africa's first community-owned and community-run elephant sanctuary, operated by the local Samburu people themselves. Staff there work around the clock, feeding orphans specialized milk formulas, monitoring their health, letting them play together in groups that function almost like real herds. Calves stay for roughly 3 to 4 years until they're old enough and strong. Enough, and then they're systematically released back into wild herds in the area. That's the part of the story most viewers don't see. The play, at Reteti, isn't optional. It's medicine. Orphaned elephants show classic signs of post-traumatic stress, night terrors, sudden screaming, periods of deep depression. Letting them wrestle and lean on each other isn't entertainment. It's how their nervous systems rewire. For Whittemeyer, this kind of single calf rescue is a detour from the bigger fight. His team's main work, and the reason those GPS collars exist in the first place, is landscape protection. The geographic range of African elephants has shrunk hard over the last 20 years. Most elephant movement now happens outside official park boundaries, on community lands with no formal protection. African human populations are projected to keep climbing for the next 80 years. Roads, railways, and farms are slicing through migratory corridors that families like the royals have been using for generations. When elephants raid crops, families lose a season of food in a single night. Farmers retaliate. That's almost certainly where Sylvia's old jaw wound came from, the price of being a big animal in a shrinking landscape. Lose the elephants, and you lose more than elephants. They knock over trees and keep grasslands open for grazers. They dig wells and dry riverbeds with their tusks and feet during droughts, creating water sources that hundreds of other species depend on. They eat seeds in one place and deposit them, fertilized and ready, dozens of kilometers away, replanting forests as they go. Pull them out of the system, and the system collapses around them. Science now recognizes two distinct African species, the savanna elephant and the smaller forest elephant. The savanna elephant is listed as endangered. The forest elephant is critically endangered. A century ago, millions of elephants moved across the continent. Today, fewer than 415,000 remain. At the worst point of the recent poaching crisis, somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 were being killed every year, roughly one every 15 to 20 minutes, fueled by an ivory black market that bankrolls organized crime across multiple continents. The pressure has been so heavy and so targeted at large tusks that an evolutionary shift is now showing up in the data. More female elephants are being born tuskless. The poachers have, in a grim way, started shaping the species. The answers Whittemeyer and his team are chasing aren't dramatic. They're slow. Geofencing, where collared elephants crossing virtual boundaries near farms trigger automatic warnings to farmers' phones. Beehive fences, lined with active hives that use the elephants' deep fear of African honeybees to keep them out of crops, while giving farmers a second income through honey. Camps like Elephant Bedroom, where tourist money proves to local communities that a living elephant is worth far more than a dead one. The end goal, behind all the trackers and drones and acoustic recorders, is bulletproof data, the kind that lets African governments draw legally protected wildlife corridors on a map and keep them there. Whittemeyer himself sits on the IUCN's African Elephant Specialist Group. When he's not in Samburu, he's teaching wildlife biology at Colorado State, where his students named him Best Teacher of 2026. The calf is still at Reteti as of this writing. She is one orphan among many, fed by Samburu staff who know her name, learning to lean on other calves the same way she once leaned on Markle. Somewhere out on the Gurgir Plains, Adelaide and Markle and the rest of the royals are still moving in their old patterns, splitting and recombining, calling to each other through the ground. Sylvia is gone. Her calf is alive because a tourist camp made a phone call, because a scientist with 30 years of notebooks could pick one family out of 40, because an ant rumbled into the dust and a baby rumbled back. None of that happens in isolation. It happens because local staff knew who to call, because researchers built the records, because a community sanctuary existed to catch what the wild couldn't hold. An elephant never forgets. And as this rescue showed, their families never stopped listening for their call.